So the Pakistan's roles in the 2026 US-Iran conflict. I mean, the proxy, the venue, and what is the power reality actually. So the basic argument is that in 2026, the US-Iran conflict, Pakistan was not really acting as an independent power center. What we see and what we have assumed over a period of time, it was more like a useful intermediary. Almost a venue, not kind of a real player who is participated or who has a say in this whole structure or in this whole mediation process. So the US, especially through the 2025 Trump, when got Asim Munir engaged, seemed to have placed Pakistan in a position where it could help with communication or coordination and hosting. But I mean, this is what I can guess now in hindsight, that this was actually the motive of Trump administration to make sure that Asim Munir and Shahbaz Sharif come close to the Capitol Hill, but not actually that shaped the final outcome. So the point is not that Pakistan suddenly became a major strategic force over here. The point is that it became a convenient tool in a bigger great power game, and that is where the metaphor fits very perfectly when we say that Pakistan was not the marriage hall. It was technically a warehouse, being given for the marriage hall. So in other words, it provided a space, logistics, and access, but they were not the real control. They did not have the real control. Even it had been Papua New Guinea, instead the deeper power equation would not really change. So the real decision, I mean, still belonged to these both powerful countries, and Pakistan was just acting as a dakia. That one message was given by the Iran, and he was taking it into Pakistan, and US, and US was giving one chitti to give it to Iran, and he was giving back to them. ईरान के फॉरेन मिनिस्टर ने एक बहुत लंबा पोस्ट अपने एक्स पे लिखा, ये बताते हुए कि पाकिस्तान ने किस तरीके से धोखा दिया। और ये बात मैं बहुत पहले से कह रहा हूँ कि पाकिस्तान जैसी कम्युनिटी जो है वो सिर्फ पैसों और IMF ऑक्सीजन के पीछे भागती है। वो कुछ भी कर लेंगे, वो भीख मांगने के लिए, वो किसी भी तरह की नेगोशिएशंस, मैनेजमेंट, लॉजिस्टिक्स को मैनेज कर लेंगे, वो किसी के गुड बुक्स, अमेरिका के गुड बुक्स में आने के लिए और चाइना के गुड बुक्स में आने के लिए। तो यही बात तो पूरी दुनिया कह रही थी एक समय से, जो ईरान को समझाया जा रहा था कि ईरान जैसी कंट्री पर भरोसा नहीं किया जा सकता है। यही सेम बात इजराइल कह रही थी कि आप ऐसी कंट्री पे भरोसा नहीं कर सकते, दे कैन नॉट बी ट्रस्टेड इन एनी ड्यू कोर्स ऑफ एक्शन बिकॉज़ दे हैव अ सर्टेन मोटिव एंड दे वर्क अकॉर्डिंग टू दैट सर्टेन मोटिव, एंड दैट मोटिव इज सो चीप कि वो अपने आप को ही बेच देंगे इस चक्कर में। सो तो टेक्निकली ट्रम्प मुनीर की जो मीटिंग थी, इट टेक्निकली ओपन विद फर्स्ट थिंग, एंड दिस वाज द फर्स्ट थिंग इज टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट इट डिड नॉट हैपन रैंडमली इन 2026. आई फील द ग्राउंड वर्क हैड ऑलरेडी बीन लेड इन 2025. So the Trump's engagement with the Field Marshal Asim Munir was technically unusual, and I felt even that was happening, I felt that during when this whole structure, when this whole setup was being built, I even then I felt that they wanted some motives, they wanted some gains from Pakistan, and it was technically politically loaded when Munir and Shahbaz went to Trump administration to have a meet. So Munir received a solo White House lunch, technically, which was highly significant because he was not Pakistan's head of state. Trump publicly thanked him for helping de-escalate the India-Pakistan crisis in May 2025, and he also openly said that Pakistan understood the Iran very well. He praised Munir repeatedly and treated him as someone very important and personally trusted. And this whole structure, the narrative when it was built, it was how India was being criticized that America is taking sides of Pakistan. I mean, America is no one to take anyone's side. I mean, they are doing it for some purpose, and we can of course see the purpose. What was the purpose of America? And that matters because once the US-Iran situation escalated in 2026, Pakistan was already a sweet spot. So it had a personal access, political visibility, and the kind of usefulness the Washington wanted in that moment. So when the conflict deepened, it happened with the strikes on the Iranian facilities, the retaliation, the oil disruption, and when all these tensions were around the Strait of Hormuz, Pakistan was already positioned to be used as a back channel for all these tantrums and talks. ये बात बहुत पहले से सिद्ध की जा रही थी कि साहब ये पूरे तरीके का एक फसाद क्रिएट किया जा रहा है पिछले कुछ दिनों में। उधर से जेडी वांस आ रहे हैं, इधर से इनके फॉरेन मिनिस्टर आ रहे हैं, और ये पूरा फसाद पाकिस्तान ताली बजा के ढिंडोरा लेके ताली बजा के पीट रहा है कि अरे देखिए मैंने ये कर दिया। जब एस जयशंकर ने उस कंट्री को दलाल कहा था तो कोई उन्होंने गलत बात नहीं बोली थी। बहुत लोगों ने कहा था ये बात, अरे एस जयशंकर को ऐसे नहीं बोला, अरे क्यों नहीं बोलना चाहिए, दलाल को दलाल नहीं बोलेंगे तो क्या बोलेंगे? आपका काम ही उस तरीके का है। आप एक रैंडम डाकिया मूवमेंट को आप एक अपॉर्चुनिटी बता रहे हैं कि साहब हमने तो सीजफायर करा दिया US और ईरान ने। कैसी बचकाना और कितनी जाहिलियत की ये बात है। मतलब ये जो जियोपॉलिटिक्स समझते हैं, और मतलब कितने सारे एक्सपर्ट हमारे देश में सब लोग जियोपॉलिटिकल एक्सपर्ट बनके बैठे हुए हैं, और उनका भी ये कहना है। मतलब आप एक बेसिक किताब पढ़ लेंगे जियोपॉलिटिक्स, आपको समझ में आएगा कि ये कितनी मजाकिया बात है जब पाकिस्तानी बात को पीट रहा था, चिल्लाते हुए कह रहा था, और ये बात तो होना ही था। ये सबको नहीं दिखता। ईरान के फॉरेन मिनिस्टर आके इतना बड़ा पोस्ट लिखा है ये कहते हुए कि पाकिस्तान ने धोखा दिया, बैकस्टैप किया है। ये कंट्री किसी भरोसा की ही नहीं जा सकती है। And you know what? Pakistan did several things. It relayed a US peace proposal to Tehran. They hosted a regional minister for de-escalation coordination. They put forward its own 5-point plan, and they became a place for talks and shuttle diplomacy. So Trump even announced a pause in bombing and after the conversation involving the Sharif and Munir. But I mean, both the sides publicly credited Pakistan for helping keep the ceasefire alive, at least temporarily. And this is what Iran, didn't got understood, that they were being backstabbed by these Pakistanis. When you know the narrative of these people, when you know the narrative of this country, when you know the underlying tone of this country, you will understand that this country cannot be real. They understand the only definition of getting oxygen of money from the IMF, and for that they can do anything. There's no culture, there's no moral, there is no ethics for this country. This is where the proxy technically began, and it became very clear for Pakistan. The US has, I mean, it is not the first time, and Iran needs to understand that this is not the first time. US has historically used Pakistan in a very transactional way. It does not usually treat Pakistan as a true equal ally, which they claim it. It uses Pakistan's military reach, geography, and the access when it is useful. And Pakistan in return looks for the aid. It looks for the legitimacy. It looks for the strategic relevance that they wanted from America in terms whenever they are burdened with India. and that same pattern has appears here as well. So Pakistan was useful because it could technically deliver messages. It can host talks and provide a Muslim state channel that looked more acceptable than the direct US pressure. And that is what, Washington got the flexibility and the possible deniability. It also helped the US signal to Iran through a channel that did not look like a purely American dictate. And at the same time, if you see, Pakistan also helped coordinate the Arab and the regional actors. But again, that was just an influence. It was not the command. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states cannot simply be ordered around by America or, of course, Pakistan. They have their own leverage. They have their own oil. They have their own money. They have their own security ties. They have their own domestic constraints. So they can be influenced, but not dictated in a crude way. You cannot put them as a warehouse where Iran and Pakistan, US will be sitting and discussing these matters of ceasefire. Pakistan was an equal and easy option for America, and that is why from last 1 year this whole planning was being done. Pakistan, because of its own relationships with the Gulf world, its religious positioning and the regional technical utility, became a very useful bridge. And that is the whole point. It was not the architect. It was the connector. It was a bridge. This is exactly where, if you read the book of Berzenki's The Grand Chessboard, Pakistan functioned as a geopolitically pivot. It is very important because of where it is, not because of how much important power he has. And Marshimier's realism also fits here because it says that major powers often offload difficult tasks onto proxies when it is cheaper and strategically safer to do so. पाकिस्तान को उसी तरह इस्तेमाल किया जा रहा है. वो इस वजह से नहीं अहमियत दी जा रही है कि वो किस जगह पे और किस वक्त और किस तरीके से वो इस पूरे टर्म्स को डिक्टेट कर रहा था, बल्कि वो जिस ज्योग्राफी में फॉल करता है, ये किस्मती तौर पे वो उसको एक लेवरेज मिल जाता है कि वो इस तरीके की पंटर बन जाए अमेरिका का, जहाँ पे इस तरीके की चीज़ों को फैसिलिटेट किया जाए बड़ी आसानी से. So the real issue is not the venue. Venue is not the power. This is the heart of your goddamn dinner for the marriage hall, marriage hall. Because a lot of Pakistani commentators came celebrated these talks, the hostings and the ceasefire role as if Pakistan had suddenly become a major diplomatic heavyweight in this whole situation. But that is what overstating it. Pakistan provided a venue. Yes, it managed the logistics. Yes, it helped the shuttle messages, but it did not control the outcome. It did not have the leverage to force Iran to accept terms. It also did not have the power to tell the US that its demands were too much. So the actual conflict remained unchanged at the core. They technically had the nuclear issues, Hormuz, sovereignty, Israeli strikes, and the basic red lines of both sides. And that is why the line Papua New Guinea analogy works, because any neutral or acceptable host can provide the space. That does not mean the host has real negotiating power. Host is not the same as shaping the deal. So the geopolitical win is mostly optics. It gives Pakistan visibility, not some authority. And this is where Pakistan's structural weakness matters, because its economy is fragile. It's under pressure. It depends upon historically on the outside support. And it has to balance China, the US, the Saudi Arabia, and its own internal instability. And that means it cannot rally, it cannot really tell these great powers what they can or cannot do. It can facilitate, it can demonstrate, it cannot dominate this whole structure. Even Team Marshall's, if you read the Prisoners of Geography, which supports this whole narrative, when it says that geography can create the opportunity, but it does not automatically create the power. Pakistan's location makes it useful, but usefulness is not the sovereignty in the strategic sense. The writing and understanding of Hussein Haqqani, and if you read the Anatole Levin, he also explains this mismatch. Pakistan's elites, especially the military establishment, often imagine more leverage than they actually have. But when the moment comes, the real limits, it becomes very open, exposed, visible. So the US had their own reasons to prefer Pakistan in this moment. First, Pakistan is very close to the region to be useful, but not so central that it would trigger the same level of resistance that direct US pressure might create. Secondly, it could speak to Muslim world register, that made the diplomacy look very less aggressive. Third, it had the existing channels with the Gulf states and had the enough regional relevance to be used as a bridge. So the US got a low-cost intermediary. It could say it was talking through a friendly regional actor while still keeping the real strategic control over this whole situation. And this is why this is more likely the proxy diplomacy than genuine partnership or relationship that Pakistan thinks that he has. What Pakistan gained? So Pakistan technically did gain something because it gained visibility, it gained short-term, diplomatic relevance. It may also have gained some extra room for trade, military assurance, or broader political usefulness. Domestically, it also helps the military leadership project itself as important and indispensable. But all of this is still limited. Pakistan did not suddenly become a regional power broker. It did not gain the ability to set the agenda. It did not become the actor that could decide the terms of peace. So the core clash between the US and Iran remained very, very unresolved. The peace talks will go on. The whole situation will continue. And the talks themselves stalled because the demands on one side and the red lines on the other were too far apart. They could not meet at one point. So the win is real only when the level of optics. At the level of optics, you can see or perceive it, but not at the level of structural power. So Pakistan hosted this, coordinated this, facilitated this, yes, but did not shape the war, command the negotiation table, or control the red line of the US or Iran. And Pakistan come and say that they have told Iran that this is an illegitimate demand. We cannot ask this, or it went to America saying that this is an illegitimate demand. You cannot offer this or ask this. No, of course not. They don't have the channel. They don't have the capability. They don't have the capacity in any way to say or claim something like this. ये आज ये चीज को अंडरस्टैंडिंग पे अगर हम नहीं समझ पाएंगे तो ये नहीं आएगी समझ में. ये बहुत सिंपल और साधारण बात है ना. देखते हैं आगे कैसे वॉर चैनलाइज होता है, बिकॉज अभी ये वॉर वापस से एक सीज़फायर की तरफ रुका हुआ है एंड बोथ द कंट्रीज हैव टेक्निकली विल नॉट कम इनटू कंक्लूजन अंटिल देयर ओन अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ इट कम्स बैक. 12 अप्रैल को ही डिमांड्स निकल चुके थे पाकिस्तान से, और ये बहुत अमूमन सी बात है कि वो क्यों इस तरीके से डिसीजन लिया गया. कोई नेगोशिएशन टेबल पर बात हो ही नहीं पाई होगी, और जो हो भी नहीं पाती. लेट्स सी हाउ इट गोज ऑन.